So good morning. We are here with apexart TV and our current resident, Danielle.
Carpinteyro.
Thank you for joining us. You've been here almost 1 month now. I tend to have a standard set of questions that I start off with. And the first one that I ask people is about their anxiety before coming to New York. What your expectations were, what you were kind of nervous about.
At the beginning, I was very nervous about the mobility issues inside the city. How was I going to point A to point B, being able to adapt to a new transportation system, and be able to actually geographically be able to see myself in what point was I standing. So that at the beginning was for me very stressful, and I also had a little fear of, for example, the security, urban security conditions in town. I had no idea of what would I encounter. Actually, the Hollywood films never actually help, they also depict as New York as a very intense city, but also sometimes as a dangerous place. So I had those two concerns. But as soon as I was in the city, I could deal with them a little better.
You seem to have the fear of being lost.
Yes.
We've made you get lost a couple of times. Getting lost in New York City is really not getting lost because you always kind of know where you are. Mm-hmm. Did you feel contained by the city?
Yes, but I specifically got very anxious when visiting, for example, very big parks, because, you guys provided me, for example, with a cell phone with a GPS, which allows me to find myself more clearly within my location. But when you are, for example, in a very big park, that GPS does not accurately reflect the location you are in and the positions you are in, and so it was in those cases I felt more anxiety. The times I got to go to Lower East Side, specifically the story, I believe, when I went to a place called the Stone, the place that was founded by John Sorum, I had a lot of fear because I had the indication that the place was deliberately hard to find. So, but I was provided an image, so that helped me a lot. But I also consider it a little difficult to get oriented in that part of the city, in East LA, in Lower East Side.
Okay, well, I don't want to go too deep psychologically yet, mm-hmm. But did your parents lose you as a child in a park?
No, I was never lost as a park. I was lost, I believe, in a market, because we have not like an American market like Walmart, but a vegetable and food market at my town. And one time I got lost actually at the market, but never at a park. What happens is that I tend to live more in the city. I very rarely go on field trips, for example, into parks, in forests, in mountains. And what I am afraid sometimes is of the wildlife. The possibility of encountering a snake, probably. Or, you never know if a coyote is gonna attack you, or wander around you. So it is mostly the concerns with the dangers that nature presents.
So had we known, we should have sent you to a herpetology class or something to actually familiarize yourself with serpents.
I have been in a herpetary before. I have one in my town, and for example, when you see the snakes, but they are inside a container, they represent danger to you. But for example, when you're walking in a park and you try to pay a lot of attention where do you step into, but you never know. For example, if you step into a very big plant, for example, what is going to be behind? The soil can be a little confusing. You're never sure of what awaits you down the soil. So it may well be a snake or whatever.
You're a fairly domesticated person.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So, if I were to ask you to give me 3 words describing New York, what do you think?
Okay, I would first say it is very diverse. You have a wide
You've already used 10.
variety of that. Okay, that is one. The other one is intense, and the third one is chaotic.
Okay. More chaotic than Mexico City? No.
No, it isn't that chaotic, and of course it has to do a lot with the point of view of who's experiencing the city. But in certain aspects of the city life, it is unpredictable. And in certain places of the city, certain neighborhoods can actually be very unpredictable. You never know, for example, what will you encounter there, what situations may explode inside a train wagon, for example, which I actually had the chance to experience a couple of those situations. So there is certain tensions.
You saw some confrontation?
Yes, actually, I got confronted. I got confronted in the subway by a person. I believe it was a homeless person. He was a homeless person, and clearly affected psychologically. And they immediately confront you. They call you, "Hey, papi, come on, give me $5," and you immediately know that you have to get in the next wagon, for example. So those kinds of situations may seem a little chaotic, but they are very natural, in the life of a city.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Your sense of New Yorkers, are they friendly? Are they...
Most of the New Yorkers I have met, they were very friendly. They're actually, whenever I needed instructions on the subway, I was given by the people. The only little, for me, the only little problematic issue was with the doorman. And for example, I would recommend to the new fellows that come into apexart, the resident fellows that come into New York, that when they go to the apartment, immediately they buy a can of Coke or lemonade and give it to the second or towers doormen, because at the beginning they will give you the hard time. They will ask you 3 or 4 times, each of them, what are you doing in there? So it is important actually to, at the beginning, be friends with them. Otherwise, they will be they will give you a hard time. And also, for example, in other places that I went, for example, in the, I don't remember the name of the building, but it is like the how do you say it? Czech Republic? Mm-hmm. Okay, the
Czechoslovakia.
Czechoslovakia Artistic Center by the Upper East Side. In that building, for example, I remember I went with Larissa, and then she went out, and then I went back into the building, so that the doorman that was at the place saw me going out. And when I went in, she said, "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the projection of the movie there." "Okay, you have a pass on you?" So I showed her the pass. But they have that attitude, and I believe there is their job somehow to keep the security of the buildings, of the precincts, but you have to have a little, you also have to know how to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Mm-hmm. We tell people that they're going to be bored, lonely, mm-hmm. and depressed, mm-hmm. at different times during our program. Mm-hmm. we have people do a lot of things alone, as you've seen, because we feel it gives people a chance for reflection and internal dialogue. Can you give me an example of each of those while you were here?
Yeah, somehow I am very used to being lonely because in my town I live alone. I don't see people a lot, but specifically when I was taken to or instructed to go to parties. For example, I was in a party in July 4 by Brooklyn in a place called the Secret Reward Project. There was a lot of guys in there. There were people, but they were all friends, and it was a little more than like a private party. So I immediately freaked out because I felt like I was breaking into the party, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So the experience to see people talking to each other, and not including you, for example, in the conversation, they were kind to me in the sense that they actually gave me a beer, gave me a little like tour of the place, but that was it,
But they pulled you back in when you were going to go.
Yeah, no, it wasn't them. It was another person that was breaking into the party. That was, by the way, he's a New York artist called Anthony Pegues, and he was the one who told me, no, do not go. Even though they know they say this is a private party, let's go back and have a chat with them. So yeah, but in that specific moment, I had a feeling of not quite belonging. And also, for example, when I attended certain classes, for example, I went to a Falun Gong class at a library. I was able to see that most people in there knew each other also. So they were very patient to me, showing me the movements, how should I make the exercises. But in that case, I also felt that I didn't have the experience in that specific discipline like they had. I mean, all of them had been practicing for years. So for example, in that I felt lonely. Yeah, and also for example in the parks, specifically in the park called the Van Cortlandt Park. I walked inside the park for 20 minutes, and I saw no one inside the park, not a human being, not a car. So that immediately got me very nervous, for example. Yeah, and I felt very very lonely for being completely outside the populated world. So in that I felt extremely lonely.
Sometimes when people do things that makes them uncomfortable, it desensitizes them to their fear.
Yes.
Did we move you away from a certain amount of fear of either getting lost here? Did we move the bar so that you're more comfortable now?
Yes, I did. You guys did. Actually, for example, I am not a very social person, so whenever I am in the middle of a meeting in which I start to feel uncomfortable, I immediately move out. In 5 and 10 minutes I try to move out, and for example, yesterday the last activity I had was an improvisation class, and you had to make all kinds of absurd sounds, movements, and impersonations, and go with the sometimes with whatever people were feeling. So in that I felt very weird, but I liked it. I profoundly enjoyed that experience. It allowed me to feel a little more liberated, to have fun being not articulated, to have fun being silly. So in that I felt very good. I also remember feeling very weird at the morning, for example, attending an English class for persons that come, most of them from the Middle East, and they are starting to learn English, for example. So when I was in that place, I was asked, where do you come from? You come from the Middle East? And I told them no. I come from Mexico, but my English, I don't believe it is that bad, but I would like to practice it. And they told me, your English is perfectly good, but this is not a place for you to learn English. But if you want to participate in the conversation groups, you are allowed. There is no problem with that. And somehow those are the situations that make me feel a little uncomfortable, situations that I wasn't able to explain myself. By the way, at the beginning of the residence, the first 3 or 4 days, whenever I showed up to a meeting, I don't know why I had the idea in my head that you guys have previously contacted the persons to tell them, hey, we are this organization and we are sending a person that is a resident. So I showed at the places and nobody knew what I was doing there. So I came with this line, I'm here in education or relations, and they were like, what? So I stopped saying that, and I started to just come as a tourist, that I am here to live certain experience as a curious person that wants to know what is happening in there and wants to take place. So, for example, in my case, and if this video is useful to further residents, whenever you show to the events or to the meetings, just say, okay, I'm a person that I have just arrived to New York and I want to see what this is about. I have an interest in this. I do not know anything about it, or I know a little, but I want to take part in this, and that's it.
Okay, that's good to know. We don't set up a lot of things. I mean, we do set up a lot of things, of course, people that you know and they know what you're going to do and everything. But a lot of it is that encounter situation that we really want people to have. Because when you go to another country, tourist or work or something, you'll remember this and you'll have that as kind of implanted memory, and it's like, okay, this is just like Apex.
Exactly.
I'm here.
Yes, it is quite an experience, for example. And I remember one of the most, at the beginning, most awkward experiences was when I went to Washington, D.C., and I showed at the house of a poet. And at the beginning, I went to the house. I saw a lot of people chatting outside, and I felt like very embarrassed, to show him there. I didn't know if he knew me or he was aware that I was coming. And finally, I was giving rounds around the around the house for about 10 minutes because I couldn't decide, to move into the house. Until I finally moved inside, Casey immediately introduced me to the people, which for me is very awkward because sometimes I like to go unnoticed, people not to notice, and then chat about one person at a time. But they make this announcement, hey, this is Daniel, he's a fellow, he comes from Mexico, and then all eyes are on you. So in that moment you feel very weird, but actually people were very educated. They actually asked me things about my country. They seemed very aware of the history and the politics of my country, so I immediately started making conversation. But that aspect, facing people you don't know, being afraid that your English won't be understood, for example. So it is a fear that you should overcome somehow, and you have to go through it. There is no other way around it. So in that, the experience has been to me very, very useful.
I found in those situations, I try to look for the uncomfortableness of other people, and then I can see where they also are a little nervous. but we have sent you to many categories of activities: music,
Yes.
philosophy, meditation, even self-defense.
Self-defense, religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, self-defense was very interesting because most of the people that were in the Krav Maga class were actually students. They didn't knew a lot about it, and it is not a discipline that compromises very athletic movements. It is only about turning the adversary's force against him or deviating the force of your adversary. And I actually had the chance to talk further when the class ended with the teacher,
Nice.
who actually told me that he lived in Israel, and he was part of the defense. Well, he was a soldier because in Israel, even males and females, they all have to go into military service. So, and he encountered a lot of situations when he came to New York. He found himself in certain very awkward situations, violent situations. So he decided to found this school to teach people how to defend, and there are males and females in the school. I was very amused that I was into that class because it confirmed my theory that, oh, this is a very dangerous city. So that is why in the second week I'm being sent to that class.
that's
in case I am trying to be mugged or something, I know how to defend myself. So I consider it very practical, actually.
Did you walk out very?
No. It was actually for me nothing much more than an exercise. It wasn't very aggressive. When I was a little kid, I have taken Taekwondo, for example, and that is a little more intense. Mm-hmm. That is sharing kicks. That is sharing more body contact, body impact, and the body contact in Krav Maga isn't very intense. It is only like somebody wants to hit you, how to take the force of that punch and deviate it, for example. And a lot of that is trying to reach the genitals of your opponent and deactivate him. So that I like a lot. For example, if I lived in New York, I would go to that class every week.
It sounds like a good approach of avoidance rather than killing the other person.
Exactly. That is what it is about.
I'm not sure, but if somebody comes to New York now in the last 10 years, mm-hmm. if they encounter aggressive situations on a fairly regular basis, it's because they're looking for them.
Yes.
So it sounds as if he found more situations that he had to defend, mm-hmm. because New York now is really a very safe city.
It is.
One of the safest big cities in the world, mm-hmm. Which is kind of nice.
Yeah, actually for me, it was a very interesting cultural shock, because I grew up with these movies of Clint Eastwood, these movies of Charles Bronson in the 70s, in the 80s. And I grew with music like the White Snake group with songs like Escape from Brooklyn. So I grew up with this idea that, for example, Brooklyn was this urban jungle, extremely dangerous, which somehow actually made me excited, to see that. Then the first activities, I was sent to Brooklyn. I see this very organized community. They have farms all over the place. They have a lot of artist studios. Their artists know each other. They have a network of working. They work among them, and they work with the community. So I said, this is not the Brooklyn I was informed by the 70s and 80s American movies. So, but I liked it a lot. Actually, I found it a lot more interesting than the traditional places that people come to visit New York. A lot of people, for example, at least people I know in my country, in my town, when they told them New York, they want to know Wall Street, They want to know the Fifth Avenue. They want to know Madison Square Park. They want to know the Mets. Those places. They want to see the skyscrapers in the glamour. That was interesting. I saw it. I had activities in there. But I consider it infinitely more interesting to meet artists in Brooklyn, for example, to see the art that they are making in the walls, to see the kind of proposals they are working. For me, it is a more vital community than maybe in other parts of New York. And I believe it is the future of New York, because a lot of properties will be of affordable price are being built in that place, which I hope does not affect the people that now live in Brooklyn in terms that it may raise a little the cost of living. And it was weird because I wasn't aware of these situations. And after that, you guys contacted me with a person that works in the Empire Trust.
State building.
Empire State Trust, Building State Trust. Real estate trust, and he explained to me how that business works, how the prices of the real estate go up, how do they go down, how do actually they affect the value of the products you can get in a store. Only the price of a can of a beverage, of a drink or water. So I learned a lot actually of how the city moves in that direction.
And we're talking about Tom Keltner now.
I'm Mr. Tom Keltner, yes.
Right.
Who actually is vice president, chairman of the. It is the real estate company, and he actually has a lot of experience in these matters. So he has an idea of which properties will be up and which properties will be down. Even though I understand they only work in the Manhattan area, for example, and they work like only for technology companies or information companies or entertainment companies, for example. But he explained to me also what is happening right now in those places.
As much as you like Brooklyn, it is going through a very substantial gentrification,
Yes.
which makes it comfortable for those of us who are of a certain art socioeconomic mentality, but we are displacing many people who used to live there the same way we did in Manhattan. So Brooklyn is getting much more livable for people like us, but much harder to live for the people that grew up there and actually do live there. We're pushing them out.
Exactly. For example, one of the activities I had was to go to the Brooklyn Historical Society, and I went there to. Well, it was not a lecture; it was like a chat, like a talk between four persons. Two of them were members of the Brooklyn communities in decades ago, and two of them were, I understand, real estate developers. They had this project of developing 5,000 departments of low price in the term, I believe, of 5 to 8 years. And it impressed me that at the beginning they talked about what they know about Brooklyn, the studies they had in Brooklyn, and I understand they had the support of the mayor, but
This mayor or the last mayor?
I believe De Blasio is the current mayor. They had the support of him, but they needed to have also the support of the community. They had to convince the community, lobbying with the high governmental structures. It is not enough anymore, at least in those places. They have to lobby also with the community. They have to actually try to convince them, and they went through a very uncomfortable questions. Actually, they were saying, we're only going to construct very affordable living, and people in the audience actually raised their hand and told me, okay, but the fact is that I don't know if what is affordable to you it's also affordable to me, because for you, affordable maybe $1,500 a month. That is not affordable to me, because a lot of people, that is what they win maybe into weeks or some in a month. So they had to discuss these issues with the people, and actually some very scandalous things were addressed in there, like the harassment some of the inhabitants of Brooklyn have to face with the landlords. Sometimes they will intentionally flood the buildings, so they get the people out, for example. So those things I only thought that happened in places like Mexico. No, they happen all over the place. So for me, it was interesting because you have access to insider information that you won't find in Wikipedia, or you won't find in like open sources. You have to go to the place to learn about it.
Is this kind of activity beginning to happen, though, in Mexico?
Yes, it has begun. For example, in Mexico City, it has begun about 8 years ago, and they made specifically by the influence of Carlos Slim. He made substantial inversions in the Mexico City downtown. They called it Centro Histórico. Yeah. And he made substantial inversions to rescue, but a lot of people that actually, one of his conditions is that certain commercial activities could not any longer be carried out in those places. Like, for example, people that sell things in the streets, they couldn't do anymore. So those people have actually been displaced. Also, for example, that the first square of Mexico City downtown used to be a square where the working class lived and the middle class. And right now the properties are actually being worth 5 to 10 times what they were worth 10 years ago. So now you got in there living people that actually have a lot of money, and those people are displaced, which is scandalous because those people work in downtown. They have to go to the perimeter of the city and travel 1, 2, or sometimes 3 hours to get to their jobs. So,
well, yesterday you made a very important point to me that I didn't realize. You were telling me about the Washington, D.C. subway, where you pay depending on how far you go.
Exactly.
And my first reaction was that, oh, that sounds equitable. You know, you go on a highway, you drive 4 exits, you pay for 4 exits. But then you pointed out that the very people that were made to live at a distance were the ones that couldn't afford, and we're charging them more. So we should be charging people less the farther they travel.
Or at least maybe we should. I believe the payment system for the subway in New York City is in that thing a little more democratic, if you want to see it that way. You know, because everyone can have access, and everybody pays a standard price, for example, and people, for example, that in their places you have to pay $4.50 for one travel, and in Washington D.C. Yeah. So if we make the math, people can actually only consume $9 in transportation, public transportation. The transportation has a difference with New York City. It is cleaner, it is a little more organized, but it is very utterly expensive. So in that, for example, I understand an institutional view on how to plan the economics and the taxes. Mm-hmm.
So we've largely kept you out of the art world, and we've asked you not to make artwork, even though I know everybody is always thinking in their head. Did you find that almost being given permission not to work, was that a liberating quality for you, that you didn't have to worry about your art or your career, but that you were just taking in?
Yeah, mostly in my experience, what I did was, I took a lot of notes. It was all the time taking notes. Actually, I am one thing I have been working in my mind is a long story based upon something like Apex, but for a resident that is asked to go only to underground places, very dangerous and very turbulent places, and so it is like a little satirical story, but I was
No, it is autobiographical.
it is somehow autobiographical, exactly. But for me that was very inspiring. Also, when I visited the Empire State Building yesterday, and that gave me a lot of ideas for a poem. Actually, I was in there, and when I started writing a poem, I started writing on my cell phone. It is impossible if you come from another place. You create whatever you create, photography, writing, whatever you create, and not feel inspired by each of these situations that you actually live in here. Also, I was able to attend a Shinto conference. It was very interesting because I had the idea that it would be like two Asian lecturers that would give the conference, and no, there were like not Asian persons. They were actually very obsessed with Japanese culture, Japanese myths and reference, and they gave this conference because they were getting funds to travel to Japan and know these things they haven't studied for 10 years. And actually it was very interesting because they had Asian people attending the lecture as they wanted to learn about it. And that gave me a lot of ideas, because if you want to travel to a place, well, you can make a lot of research, study a lot, then make conference about it, and then may help you to actually fund yourself to travel to those places. So it is impossible to not conceive any ideas while being in the fellowship. Mm-hmm.
But it's also a little bit about your preconceived idea, so that if you go to something about something Japanese, mm-hmm. you expect to see a Japanese person.
Exactly.
Which is kind of interesting.
And you arrive and you see, for example, two very young Caucasic youngsters giving a conference, and actually they being very well educated in Japanese language, being very well educated in mythology. And for example, I like a lot of Japanese culture. I like a lot certain Japanese director like Takashi Miike or Takeshi Kitano, for example. And a lot of references from those films seem to me very deliberately absurd. I found out they were not absurd. They only responded to a cultural logic that I wasn't aware of at all. So in that case, for example, in that conference, I also developed ideas. You're always developing, and it is a little frustrating because you get in touch with a lot of fields of knowledge. Each day you get 3 tasks, and some tasks may be at the beginning more interesting than others, but you will be in touch with a new field of knowledge that you were completely unaware of, and then you want to deepen it, but then you have to move to the next, and you're all taking notes. And when you leave, I don't know what will happen when I leave, but I know that I will have a lot of work to do. I will be working what I have learned for years, completely for years, because it has provided me with a lot of materials, but also with new procedures, for example, to approaching situations from which
we tell people that they will not be able to digest the experience really until they go home.
Exactly.
And then certain things will stick out. So one thing that we instituted a couple of years ago is that our fellows will see a therapist.
Yes.
And we decided that for many people, it's a cultural issue. When you go south, psychotherapy is much more accepted in the Americas and South Americas. Whereas if you go to Asia or Eastern Europe, you only go to a therapist if you really have problems. And we found that by bringing people here, also when we send people to other places, that there are so many things that they're thinking about, so many sometimes conflicts, sometimes fear, whatever it is, that having this anchor to be able to go in and talk, if it's not a new experience, is very satisfying. And if it is a new experience, it's kind of revelatory for people to realize that they should talk about what they're thinking, and that can help.
Yes, in my case, I already had experience with psychotherapists since I was very young kid, and I believe it is a very good decision that apexart takes to send people with a psychologist, because of the issue of isolation. People can sometimes, for example, there may be people that are very fond of their families. So being separated from them for a month may actually be very difficult for them. In my case, for example, I live alone, so I have no problem with that. But a lot of people don't. Actually, I believe the vast majority of the people do not live alone. They live with their families. And so I think it is a very good decision. In my case, in my experience, I found a lot of comfort, for example, in situations that I found a little stressing. For example, I found someone who heard me, someone who actually talked with me and showed a genuine interest in my person and in my thoughts and in my troubles, for example.
She liked you too.
Oh, thank you. So I felt very good actually, and it helped me a lot, because as you have pointed, sometimes you do not talk to people in 2 or 3 days. I have seen that, for example, you have planned that one should talk to someone with specific interviews at about age 3 to 4 days. That is very good, because then people do not get completely isolated. But anyway, I believe that it is a good decision by apexart actually to provide the fellow with psychological attention.
Okay. And what about the blog? Did you find you're kind of a writer, where a lot of people are visual artists? Usually a visual artist we will encourage to write, and a writer we will encourage to take more pictures.
Yes.
How did you feel?
I feel great actually. I like both, but in pictures I have never taken professional photos or anything. I actually came to New York with a camera that a friend provided, because I don't even own a camera, and it was interesting for me because I knew I made a little research on how to get good angles, how to select, for example, the light, the exposition time, and the last photographs I took in Columbia University, and I took them in Columbia I believe it was Sunday, going out of the private concert of Mrs. Marjorie Elliott. I went walking around Harlem, and I went to Columbia again. I had been there once, but at night it's completely different. And I had planned to go back there, because the first time I went to Columbia, I forgot my professional camera at the apartment. So I had a plan to go back there, and when I saw that I was around, it was night. But anyway, I took, I believe, pictures that personally satisfied me a lot. And now I like a lot, playing with images, playing with the light, finding angles. Of course, when you are out of your town and in a completely different place, everything you see is something you want to take a photograph of. Because of the cultural value of the place, because of the visual value of what you are seeing. And of course, the interesting thing is when you go back to your town to find the everyday life objects you find, also be able to take photographs of them or to create images with them that can also be appealing to anyone.
Never know. You're probably going to get a camera when you
Yes,
go home.
I will.
Yeah. Okay. So just a couple of quick questions because we're not far from the end of our interview. Favorite food?
If the first noodles that I tried here with Larissa took me, great noodles you have here.
Chinatown?
No, it wasn't Chinatown. It was, I believe, no, it was not far from Union Square.
It was
Okay.
like Little Japan on Stuyvesant Street.
I don't know it.
Yeah, it's like one row of Japanese and Korean.
Oh, nice.
Oh, and the falafel. Falafel, I have never tried it before. And here, for example, it is like fast food. So I recommend falafel.
How many days until somebody asked you for directions?
No, 2 days.
Okay.
2 days, and I wasn't able to provide them.
Did you have any sense? One interesting thing about New York, most other countries tend to be homogeneous in the makeup.
Yes.
So if you're in Asia and you're an American, people probably are not going to ask you for directions because you don't seem similar. How did you sense the racial? Because a lot of people talk about race in America, in the US, because they don't experience it. Now, of course, countries are experiencing it a lot more in the last 10 years. But many countries often feel as if they have no racial consciousness because they have no other race to think about. Here, you see everybody. Did this have an effect on you in any way?
Well, you have to be cautious. For example, you at the beginning you don't know what kind of encounters will you have. So when I was approached from people to give them instructions, I actually had Americans, African Americans or white persons approaching me for directions, and sometimes I could provide, sometimes I couldn't. I was about half of the people that asked me for directions were people from Spain and people from South America. They saw me and they asked for directions.
Do they ask in Spanish?
In Spanish, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they saw me and immediately they see you have the Hispanic type, so immediately they know
You could look Arabic, you could look
Yeah, exactly.
it's so hard.
It is hard to tell.
Yeah.
But for example, in racial things, for example, in Mexico we also have a lot of prejudice that we haven't been able to deal with, because we also are a multi-ethnic country. The fact is that not a lot of people want to see it. We have the Spaniard influence. We have the Aboriginal influence.
Yeah, big Chinese influence.
We have Chinese influence.
Yeah.
We have African influence also. So not all people want to see it. But we are told there to, for example, certain persons of certain racial types, not look them in the eyes, for example, because they can be conflictive and that stuff. So it is all based upon prejudice completely. And they actually, when you are showing here, you are afraid of persons of certain racial origins. So, but I believe, yes, there is a reason why the multicultural studies, I believe I don't know, but I believe they emerged from the United States. Because here race matters, actually, how can you approach people from other backgrounds? For example, I've seen here the Hispanics that have been born in here or been living in here for a lot of time. Most of them will actually listen to some kinds of music, very specific kinds of music, music ranchera we call it, actually music from northern Mexico, tropical music we call it. They will listen to things like reggaeton and those specifically musical trends that I see that they are promoted not a lot from Latin America but from Miami and sold as Latin American or sold as Mexican, but there is also a lot of merchandising because Latin America is more than those kinds of music. There is also jazz made in Latin America, rock made in Latin America, there is camera music, classical music, electronic music that has been composed in Latin America. But for example, what I see is that in the Hispanics that live here in the States, most of them do not want to have any relationship with that because they believe it does not actually belong to their how do you say, well, like to the culture that defines the race.
Bastardization of culture.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But I believe if you come here open mind, you will enjoy a lot of kind of music. For example, where I ate falafel, I found beautiful Middle Eastern music, beautiful Eastern music. When I visit Chinatown, I love Chinese music. I have always loved it. Actually, when I went to the Falun Gong classes, we were making the exercises with traditional Chinese music. So you have a lot of influence in here. You have to stay open. You will learn a lot. You will enjoy a lot. And I have seen people get along. I have seen multiracial couples, that are from different ethnic backgrounds. They get along. So in that I like a lot.
This is a question that I probably should have asked you at the beginning rather than the end, so we won't make it too long. But an interesting thing in New York, the first Latino group were Puerto Ricans. The second group, Mexicans. The third group, Dominicans. Did you feel this? There's a weird kind of tension in the city from the three groups. A friend of mine was a director at the El Museo del Barrio.
Okay.
And majorities always have a sense that minorities are more cohesive.
Okay.
That they agree amongst themselves. And when I met him and he started telling me all of the stories about the three groups that all wanted control of the museum and that it was a very dynamic activity here for people feeling like, oh, I was here first. They're going, yeah, but I'm important, a bigger country. So there are all these interesting things. Did you see any evidence of this at all?
No, actually, when I landed at Newark Airport, the person that roomed for me, the cab operator, was a person from Puerto Rico, and it was interesting because at the beginning I talked to him in English, and because I thought he was a person from India, and then he told me, hey, but tú hablas español, and then we started talking in Spanish, and so we got along quite well. I didn't see that tension, and I saw actually Mexicans, Dominicans, and people from Puerto Rico at, for example, the markets. I to save a little money, I used to go to buy food to a place that it's called Fine Fair. It is like a market chain you got here in New York, and you can buy food for very affordable prices. And I saw
Trader Joe.
Excuse me?
Like Trader Joe.
Yes, somehow, but a little less expensive, even the Trader Joe, and they have a lot more variety. And I saw a lot of people, for example, in working at the cash counters where you pay, and what I saw, in my case, I saw an attention, but I do not doubt it. For example, because there are always certain things that happen among people that are competing, and it seems somehow that we have forgotten Simón Bolívar. Simón Bolívar was a very important Latin American thinker and activist and military who thought that all Latin America should be as one somehow. We share a lot of common traces. We share a lot of common culture, and most divided we were, as people, the most vulnerable we could be to being exploited, or to be somehow disgregated or whatever. So I believe sometimes we forget that, And
If only we could get along.
exactly.
So now, after 1 month, you have done more different things in New York than most New Yorkers. You have probably seen more diversity than most New Yorkers.
Actually, I was approached by people sometimes when I was taking photographs. I love that about New York. You always find people that want to talk to you and make conversation. And told me, hey, well, so you living here? No, I'm a tourist. I'm being here for 2 months, for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Or where have you been? And I told them like all the places, and they were amazed. Like, what, in 3 weeks? What is that Coney Island? I have never been to Coney Island. What is that place you were talking to me about? I have never been to Astoria, and I have been living here for 10 years. So what is in there? Oh, well, they have this very important Greek community, for example. Till then, before I went to each place at the beginning, the night before, I made a little research on the internet to know what kind of place I was going, what I was expected to see, so I didn't miss the cultural milestones that were to be found in the places. And yeah, people could not believe that I had only heard. I believe they thought I was kidding, because also they heard my English. It was like a little fluent, not very, but a little fluent. So also they thought that I was only playing with them.
It's funny. So when we first told you that you weren't here on a vacation,
Yeah.
and you weren't sure what we meant,
Yeah, exactly.
now
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is, but because it is actually very intense. It takes all your effort to go 3 different places at the day, different boroughs, and at night, take photographs. Actually, and taking photographs is also a mental effort, because before you take the photograph, you have to select your angle, whatever you want to take from where, and then you have to process that information mentally, to take notes, to know what you're going to write about. So it is actually very exhausting, but I like it. I like a lot Paul Bowles. You have this author in here called Paul Bowles, and he was a traveler by heart, and he traveled all over the world, but mostly around northern Africa, Morocco, and Turkey, and those places, mostly Morocco. And he went to places that very, very little European or American people have been before. Places were actually very dangerous, where they had to sleep over the sand in the desert in tents that when they woke up they found that they were completely filled with scorpions. But he loved to be in those places, and while he was in there, he was writing short stories, and he also was writing music to be played here in New York. And Paul Bowles had a very bad concept of tourists. He told tourists will go everywhere. He told about cities that he went to a lot of years ago, and they were very authentic
Right.
The rituals that were made in those cities, they were not performed for the joy of the tourists. They were performed because of cultural need. And he talked very bad about tourists. He was more of a traveler. So in that, for example, I liked about New York. The experience you guys provide invites you to become more like a traveler, to get involved with the people of the places you are in. I actually, when the first time I went to Astoria, I got invited by a couple to eat with them to their home, a couple of good persons. They told me that I looked like their son, which was for me very weird because I don't think I look Greek, but then the Mediterranean is very vast. And I got a little freaked out because I didn't knew what could be the intentions. And
You still have your kidney?
yeah, I still have it in me, but I know I didn't went in there. I didn't have the courage, but I like that. I like the ways you propose the travel for the fellow.
One thing we want very much for you to take away from this process. In Puebla, in Mexico City, there are all of the same kinds of things that you don't go to there. Because we get in our little group, we do the same thing with the same people. And what we challenge people is when you go home, you do the same thing at home.
Exactly.
You find the same kinds of activities that make you uncomfortable. You find the woods and get lost, maybe with somebody else, so at least you're doing it but feel okay. And it's kind of a mentality, like you referenced Paul Bowles. The world has discovered tourism.
Yes.
And tourism rests right on the surface in many cultures and many societies. Anywhere you go, you can always go below that if you are open and talk to people and just are open. Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, now at the end now of my fellowship, I am thinking all the time. For example, if someone went to Puebla, and I had to prepare for them a program of places to visit.
You understand you are challenging us to have a program in Puebla.
Oh, of course. If you do, for example, I know a lot of things that could be places persons should go to in Puebla. Not cultural, not only the cathedral or not only the monuments, but also people that also make poetry, slam, people that make, they give classes of acting, all kind of tours in Puebla and in Mexico City. Two places that are safe, but they're challenging because you have to merge with the environment, you have to merge with the people. And
You can't go with them though.
and I can go with them
No,
also,
no,
but
no,
if I don't
you
have,
can't.
I don't have to go. Well, I understand that.
Because if you go with them, they don't have the fear, they don't have the unknown, they don't have like exactly the things that made you feel uncomfortable are, we hope, the things that helped you also.
They help you a lot. They give you self certainty somehow. They make you feel asserted, and you can get along of things done in your life.
So I understand you would like to come back to New York?
Yes, I would really like to come back further, visit you guys. And actually, there are a lot of places that I wanted to go. But, well, for example, maybe I will come back and go to those places, know those places, make a little more research. It is a place I really like a lot. It is a city you fall in love with. And it is a city with which I have come to very good terms by now. I feel good moving around it. I like its dangers a lot. It does not present too much dangers, but I like the ones it has. And I like the people, actually. Beautiful people in this town.
So we challenge you to keep writing your blog
I will.
as long as as long as you want.
Sure.
Show us that you are doing these things in Puebla and in Mexico.
Hmm.
And maybe we will talk to you about hosting a program in Puebla.
Okay, I will. And of course, it is for me important that when I get, give a little back, or as much as I can back for you, for those fellows, because you have to make research to find these places, you know, to find these underground places.
She works hard.
Yeah, actually, Larissa is a hard worker. She provides a lot of her knowledge of the things that happen at the town. So, as I told her once, without her knowledge, my experience would have been a lot poorer. It wouldn't have been this. So, thanks a lot.
You are an honorary New Yorker.
Thank you very much. Hey, thank you.
you.